The country was in complete lockdown over COVID. We were suffocating under mandates.
The country was in the midst of a contentious presidential election, and those things all added up to a bomb that was ready to explode, and it just needed a trigger.
A white police officer, Derek Chauvin, kneeled on the neck of a black man, George Floyd.
I can't breathe. And what happened to George Floyd's a tragedy.
However, the media made it worse.
Black man, white police officer.
Just stop killing us.
George Floyd's death is being used to spin a political agenda.
This is about keeping the Democratic Party in rule.
Lies are dangerous.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
The Democrats created a violent America.
And it did untold damage to people that didn't deserve it.
He approached my husband and killed him. I believe it was cold blood.
Mayhem and rioting, killings, and it could have been prevented. It was all just left-wing chaos.
Breaking news tonight, the coronavirus forcing millions more Americans into virtual lockdown. Over 75 million people in New York, California, Illinois, and Connecticut ordered to stay at home.
We just learned that there's a pandemic, a global epidemic circling the world coming out of China. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know how many people were going to be infected, how infectious it was going to be, how many people were going to die.
The country was in complete lockdown over COVID. Many people were unemployed. Many were taking in unemployment checks. Children weren't able to go to school. We were suffocating under mandates, and everybody was living in fear of catching a disease.
You just didn't have a lot of freedoms. Restaurants were closing down. You had a lot of people that were just kind of locked in the box. And it was just a very strange and scary time.
Month after month, as other leaders in other countries took the necessary steps to get the virus under control, Donald Trump failed us. This man isn't fit to be president of the United States of America.
In an election year, everything is political. So COVID was obviously political.
A national shutdown is not a sustainable long-term solution. We're opening up our country.
The best thing would be to do is to prevent more loss of life rather than open things up.
The president's position is just absurd.
The biggest threat to the American people is the American president right now.
And I think it was handled by almost everyone in a way to maximize harming President Trump.
This is about a man who had set a very pro-American agenda. He had an economy that was successful. We had the Black community's unemployment at low rates. We had Hispanic communities' unemployment at record low rates. The progressives needed to end that, and the best way was to ruin his economy, thereby ruining his chance for re-election in 2020.
It's unlikely that many of these schools, few if any, will open before the summer.
I am directing all non-essential retail businesses to indefinitely close their physical stores.
Stay home unless it is necessary for you to go out.
People had too much time in their hands. The country was in the midst of a contentious presidential election. There was a lot of political combustion ready to happen. And those things all added up to a bomb that was ready to explode, and it just needed a trigger. And that trigger was exactly what happened to George Floyd.
There was a call shortly after 8 p.m. from a local convenience store, South Minneapolis. There was apparently a man that had passed a counterfeit $20 bill.
Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand.
I'm sorry.
Let me see your other hand.
Police come. He's apparently high as a kite.
In the video, you see that there was George Floyd with other people that were in the vehicle.
How you doing, sir?
I'm good. They complied with what the officers were requesting. They told them to step out, and they listened to them, and they stepped to the side. George Floyd was, on the other hand, not complying with any of the requests that the officers were making.
Don't shoot me, man. Step out and face away. Can you not shoot me, man? I'm not shooting. Step out and face away.
And I can understand someone being afraid of what's going on, a police officer pulling you out of the car. I can get that, but compliance was just the simplest tool.
Floyd was given every chance to just get into the back of the squad car and then continued to fairly violently resist arrest.
Okay, breathe. You're talking
to the point where he had to be put on the ground in order to control him.
The officer did what I believe was a very critical mistake, and rather than requesting ambulance assistance and having the ambulance take him away, we saw Officer Chauvin placing his knee on the back, neck area of George Floyd. And in the video, officers were not responsive to what he was requesting.
The public was absolutely outraged and participating.
Child, check his pulse. Check. The man ain't moved yet, bro. The man ain't moved yet, bro.
So they had a very direct visual. All 9 minutes and 29 seconds of Chauvin's knee on George Floyd.
George Floyd eventually died on the pavement. A lot of this could have been avoided had the officer handled the situation appropriately, but then also it should have never escalated to that point had George Floyd followed the instructions that he was given immediately.
We knew at that point that there was going to be some unrest.
David grew up in North St. Louis. He loved being a policeman. He had married and he had several kids. He had 5 children before we met. As time went on, the grandkids started coming. Well, Dave's second job was in security, and we met there. We became really good friends. He was going through a divorce. I was breaking up with somebody, so we just started talking to each other. He made me fall in love with him. Very kind, very giving person. He retired to the rank of captain from the city department. We were together for 30 years total. I was a police officer for 28 years. Dave was in my life the entire time. We had the George Floyd protests going on. I got home and I went to bed because I knew I had to be up super early in the morning because I was doing 12-hour shifts. Dave would go in the basement then to watch TV. 4 o'clock in the morning. Somebody's knocking on the door.
Jake was a very happy young child. He loved animals. He went to Northeast Christian Academy until 7th grade in El Paso, Texas, and then we moved to Nebraska. Jake served with the Marines from 2000 until 2004.
I met Jake at the School of Infantry, Camp Pendleton, California. He was just a character. He was my best friend. Jake was part of the RCT-1 invasion force in Iraq. He did have PTSD. He also had a traumatic brain injury, but he was somebody that wasn't going to let any of that stop him. Jake had been financially destroyed through the COVID. He was a nightclub owner. The only savings that he had were in the forms of bottles left on a shelf.
And Jake went down to protect his bar that night, and that was all Jake's intentions were.
I always wanted to be a police officer. I grew up here in New York City, son of a single mother. I started off in East New York, Brooklyn, and at the time it was one of the deadliest places in the United States. After 9/11, I worked at Ground Zero. I was in the strategic response group. We respond to disorderly groups. I was deployed to the Brooklyn Ridge because we had some people that wanted peace within the city, and they were going to march from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Our goal was to keep it peaceful.
I grew up in SoCal. I was a youth pastor for like 5 years. And then once that kind of came to a close during the pandemic, things shifted in my life. And that's when I got fully involved in journalism and reporting. The mainstream media at the time was trying to portray riots as protests. It wasn't true. They were not protests. These were riots. And I started to film this stuff, saw some lies, and decided to expose them.
The following day after George Floyd died, the video became viral.
Everybody who saw it was obviously deeply disturbed. This looked like torture. This looked like murder.
Americans witnessed Minneapolis start to erupt. People were surging upon the police precinct where Derek Chauvin and other officers were located.
One event created so much anxiety, it filled the air.
It plays perfectly into so many narratives that have been constructed in this country about how this is an inherently racist country, and everybody just jumped on it.
A white police officer, Derek Chauvin, kneeled on the neck of a black man, George Floyd, as he begged for his life.
There was the excuse for all these groups to come out and turn this into a race war, and everything exploded after that.
Third precinct has been compromised.
Third precinct is up in flames.
Attention families with a loved one in a...
Starting
George Floyd.
Call now.
All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain.
That should never happen in America, where someone's arrested and dies with someone's knee on his neck. It was a terrible situation. However, the media made it worse.
2 deadly viruses killing Americans. COVID-19, racism 20.
They continued to throw gasoline on that fire, that racial fire that was starting to blow.
Black man, white police officer.
Black people are being disproportionately affected and targeted.
Just stop killing us. This is not a huge demand.
The media was stating that police officers had a vendetta against African Americans. It no longer became about just George Floyd. It became this narrative that they were being hunted down and unjustly treated by the police departments throughout the United States.
Most members of the media do lean left. They vote Democrat. They see themselves also as people who can affect change.
The media serves as an arm for the Progressive Party. These are political activists who are also in bed to create a certain agenda and to push that agenda that America is not great. It has never been great. And so when you have certain crises like COVID come together with a situation like a George Floyd, the media can take a situation and exploit and pull at the heartstrings of people.
People who knew him best called him Floyd. They also say that George Floyd was a gentle giant.
So right after George Floyd died, the media started to push this narrative as if he was the most innocent person in the world. They used George Floyd as this beacon of oppression. We shouldn't sit here and pretend that he's a saint or he represents all of the African-American community. This was a guy who went and tried to rob a pregnant woman at gunpoint. And he has a pretty troubled criminal history.
People can be criminals. They're still supposed to be treated fairly and humanely by the cops. But it all seemed a little much, assigning this man hero status.
The officers that were responsible for this, they could have handled the situation a heck of a lot better, but that doesn't mean that they did this for purely racial reasons.
Imagine having police called on you just for sitting in Starbucks or renting an Airbnb or watching birds. You know, this is the norm Black people in this country deal with.
Democrats absolutely needed something to fuel them going into the 2020 election. And they certainly wanted to shore up the African-American vote.
George Floyd should not be dead. He is dead, and Black blood stains the sidewalks of America.
Everyone has the best life except for Black and minorities.
Being Black in America should not be a death sentence.
The Black community to them is just a voting bloc that they need to keep the support of. And Democrats, in desperation, seized on George Floyd to say that this country is inherently racist, and the only way that it won't be is if you vote us back into power.
Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice.
This is just a warning to you Trumpers. Be careful. And for those of you who are soldiers, make them pay.
It was an ultimate opportunity to demonize the conservative base and demonize Republicans as a whole.
The president is a racist. This is a man that should never have been in the highest seat of the land.
They use it as a way to say that Donald Trump becoming president has led to open racism, and this is one of the reasons why this happened to George Floyd.
It wasn't about George Floyd anymore. COVID was no longer the issue. It was taking down a president of the United States.
David answered the calls at Lee's when the alarm would go off. Dave and Lee were friends for many years. Lee lived part-time in Florida. And anytime the alarm would go off, since we lived 10 minutes from the shop, Dave would go check the alarms. He got the call around 2:30 that the alarm had gone off, and then the building had been breached.
They were having protests in Omaha, and I texted Jake a message, and I says, have you seen or heard what's going on 72nd by my store? And he says, it's all so senseless.
Jake decided to go inside his bar, which was his prerogative, and that's what he had to do to protect his business, it turned out.
I took an oath to the Constitution, to protect everyone's right to protest. But you have to do it peacefully. A new group started called Occupy City Hall. Our concern was the Occupy City Hall protesters were going to try and disrupt this peaceful march across the bridge. We began to see that was occurring right from the beginning.
So I started in Portland. Everyone who knows what Antifa is on the far left knows that Portland is the hub. Wherever Antifa was, I was fully undercover. I was constantly and consistently worried about my safety. You could see the chatter on Twitter. Drew Hernandez is on the ground. He's out there. Make sure you let him know what Portland feels about him. That's code for assault him. Take him out because they don't want to be exposed.
There was a couple months in the summer of 2020 where you had mayhem and rioting and killings, and it could have been prevented. It was all just left-wing chaos.
Antifa and Black Lives Matter recognize this is an opportune time. We can drive a narrative, we'll use the media. The optics of the 3rd Precinct, Minneapolis, burning to the ground. They felt emboldened. If we can burn down a precinct, then this is our time. This presented an absolute perfect storm for this progressive agenda.
You've put up with your old shower for too long.
Of your very
due to the concern
today.
We begin tonight with one of the biggest nationwide days of protest since the killing of George Floyd in police custody. Demands for justice and change for African Americans, saying they have long been victimized by systematic racism in America.
When the protests started, it became clear that all of the COVID mandates were political to a point. People were losing their livelihoods to prevent COVID.
Today, I'm issuing a stay home, stay safe executive order for all Michiganders. This disease can't spread person to person if we're not out there.
But then, because a career criminal dies in police custody, all bets are off. And suddenly, thousands of people can get together and march, and you've got politicians marching right next to them, the same politicians in these big blue cities that had been embracing these mandates.
Governor Whitmer and Mayor Duggan joined local clergy and law enforcement in a unity march through Detroit.
It was hypocritical, the whole thing. I mean, health standards for some, not for others.
Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot declared racism a public health crisis and pledged nearly $10 million in COVID-19 federal relief money to fight it.
So the Democrats started seeing George Floyd as an opportunity to exploit racism in America, acting as if they truly care about Black communities and African American issues, when in fact they're just pandering for votes. Kamala Harris, as a sitting senator, was encouraging people to bail rioters out of the Minneapolis jail.
This is about keeping the Democratic Party in rule, taking a knee and symbolically bowing to give up and relinquish their privilege in the name of social justice.
You had certain police departments, police chiefs actually taking a knee, participating with the protesters. And that doesn't get you anything, all right? You join the mob is just going to turn on you. And that's what they did.
Outrage at the death of George Floyd, an African-American man, while in police custody in Minneapolis. In city after American city tonight, thousands of people have once again taken to the streets.
When things turned, and they did turn, and they turned in a violent manner very quickly, things started to burn.
There was hardly a major city run by Democrats that didn't start to experience riots. There was no concern for those in the communities.
Police cars were being overturned and stomped and breaking out windows.
People's businesses that they've worked their entire lives for, most of them predominantly in Black neighborhoods, completely destroyed by the same people that were supposedly here to help.
This was about telling people that the problems in their lives were not their fault. They were the fault of a systemically racist, horrible country. Go out there and tear it up, do whatever you want.
Racist white people, I'm here!
Get even with a country that's never been fair to you.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
It created mayhem, and it created unsafe cities, and it did untold damage to people that didn't deserve it.
The alarm company did call 911 and reported that the building had been breached before they called Dave.
The mayor at the time
pretty much telling the policemen to stand down and let the rioters do what they want. It's just unfathomable that she would actually make the decision she made. Knowing David the way I know him, he's assuming when he goes there, the police would be there. He got there's no police. He was by himself.
The protests were moving downtown towards Jake's bar. He was very worried about business and them damaging his bar.
That was his livelihood, and his plan was to pull the fire alarm and call the police when the windows were broken out, and that's exactly what he did.
911, maybe police, fire, or medical. I've got some people looting, breaking all the windows of my business.
The last thing he ever wanted to do was hurt somebody. He had done a lot of work personally to heal from the trauma of his combat deployments. One of the first things he said to me after the incident happened was, "I can't believe I had to pull off that Band-Aid and hurt somebody else in my life."
We started heading onto the Brooklyn Bridge because a police officer had notified me that there were protesters there with homemade armor in the middle of the bridge. We don't know if they were Antifa, but Antifa-minded like people. 2 police officers had been struck over the head by someone on the walkway with a weapon. At that point, we got off our bikes to kind of deal with the crowd and find out who attacked these police officers. We've got a very hostile crowd. We're trying to de-escalate any further violence from occurring, and there were some people fighting to my right.
I was walking around, full undercover, full black bloc, and it's just me and about 200 other black bloc Antifa around me. I just start hearing my name, like this weird, sinister, like demonic, just chanting of my name. So I knew that they were looking for me.
Antifa, it is the furthest of the left wing. They just want to destroy. They want to implement anarchy in this country. They want to silence all dissent to them in every single way, and they will do it through intimidation and force. I mean, some of these things that I'm saying are the definition of fascism, which they claim to be against.
We look at Antifa as more of an ideology or a movement than an organization.
So when they say Antifa is an idea, these ideas are in all of these different spheres of society. K through 12, you have teachers that have these radical ideas. Obviously in the universities, they have allies that work in the justice system that aren't wearing all black. They just have the same beliefs.
Black Lives Matter tear down the very neighborhoods they say they want to represent and save. It's not really about building up black people. This is a Marxist agenda.
The Black Lives Matter organization, they're talking about all different things other than protecting the lives of black people. They're talking about trans rights and destroying the nuclear family.
When people decide to get together and create a new society under the guise of social justice and eradicating a perfectly well-suited system, that's insurrection.
Attention, cancer.
Burning down police.
$1,500 off.
When the big story broke, Newsmax was first at the big facts.
It's the description of the
Mine. Anything's game.
It's the description of the gunman.
CNN came late, but Newsmax was there. We give you the real news you need to know.
There was a moment in time where America lost its mind. Anything's game. Arson, looting, ruining businesses, burning down police stations, violent assault, murder. Everything was okay in the name of the protest, in the name of the cause.
Now this, all 4 former officers involved in George Floyd's death now face criminal charges.
You would have thought that these cops would have just all been cleared of any wrongdoing. Chauvin was very quickly fired, very quickly arrested. He was charged with crimes that were sure to put him away for a long time. It didn't matter. It didn't stop anything. Nobody cared. America is reeling. This could lead to a dramatic change politically. Let's feed it. Let's keep it going.
We cannot just expect someone to be fired and that be the end of it. That's a feel-good action that doesn't solve a systemic problem.
We want America to look like it's burning down and in mayhem come the November election, because then our guys got a better shot.
People were being pulled out of their cars. They're being attacked. It was just uncontrolled outrage being spilled onto individuals.
We're seeing statues of historical American figures, part of our history, getting pulled down.
We saw lawlessness in America. Cops having to stand down because they weren't going to get support from their mayor's offices.
I don't want to see one
and certainly weren't getting support from the vast left-wing media.
What is it going to take for our country to address the issue of police violence against people of color?
The media took the side of the rioters and the looters and the people who are perpetrating crimes.
Characterize this is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly.
The violence was glossed over, if not totally ignored.
And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
I don't think that's in the First Amendment, that you can burn down buildings, obviously.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day.
All of it was condoned and encouraged.
When Antifa and BLM started taking control of the areas like Chaz and the CHOP zone that they created, they practically took over that with straight up violence. They used that as an opportunity to force the police out of their precinct. They set up a barrier, a border. This is not a peaceful revolution, as they call it. This was a violent takeover of our community. It was an insurrection against government authority. It was an insurrection against the sovereignty of the people. And none of these people were called insurrectionists.
How long do you think Seattle in those few blocks looks like this?
I don't know. We could have the summer of love.
It's just the classic white guilt, feckless politician move. It is just a perfect example of the leadership in this country.
I stand with the protesters.
Keep doing it. Your rage is real. Express it.
They will pander to whatever's hot in that moment, however illogical it is. George Floyd and the riots after showed how dangerous a situation can become when you have desperate politicians fanning an agenda that's not even real onto a populace of people that don't really care about the facts, that just want to be angry, and how destructive that can become and how fast it can happen.
In Portland, Antifa was looking for me. If you're by yourself with Antifa, you stick out like a sore thumb. Out of nowhere, one of them just comes running from behind me, grabs my helmet from behind, was trying to take my mask off, trying to take my helmet off, and I just started denying, I'm not Drew. I was able to evade and get out there very quickly because it was pitch black in this park.
We were on the Brooklyn Bridge in several fights that appeared to be going on between the crowd and the police. All of a sudden, they start getting attacked by two different guys. One gentleman hit me with a brass knuckle type jewelry. I wasn't able to see out of one eye. I got hit on the other eye by another suspect. So I pulled one of the suspects back. People kind of were fighting on top of me, but I wasn't letting go of the suspect.
Jake's business was attacked multiple times. He ventured out with his father to go survey the damage. And that's when the crowd came back.
And my husband got into an argument or something, and they pushed my husband down.
Jake lifts his shirt to show them that he's lawfully armed. That's when he's tackled from behind his assailant, puts him in a rear naked choke with the leg hook. He says 4 or 5 times, "Get off me, please get off me, I can't breathe." They're struggling over the gun. Eventually, Jake makes the choice to save his own life and reach over his shoulder and pull the trigger and struck his assailant in the collarbone, ultimately killing him.
When David got there at Police Pawn and Jewelry, he was talking to 2 of the looters, telling them, "You don't have to do this. The only thing in there is some used TVs and a couple silver chains. Anything of value is locked in the vault." Stephen Cannon approached my husband and said, "You old man," and just shot him. Point blank. I believe it was cold blood. One of the looters he was talking to actually sat with him. And I kept telling him to hold on.
OG, come on, stay with me, OG.
So he wasn't alone when he died. But he died on the street. He didn't have to die. But he died a hero. He died protecting his friend's business.
How did these governors and mayors allow the low-income and minority communities to be impacted the most by these riots and protests?
The very businesses that they hurt were businesses of color. Owners who had worked their whole lives to start a business, to recognize the American dream. That was all destroyed.
The left They should be deeply, deeply ashamed by what they did and what they allowed to happen. Lives were ruined, and they have no shame about it.
Bottle of
It's safer.
Two had so much.
Don't wait. Act now. Get your free trial bottle of Actilin, valued at $39.95.
The defund the police movement had so much energy behind it and so little logic. It exposed the lack of intelligence in so many of our leaders on the left in this country.
We will be moving funding from the NYPD to youth initiatives and social services. Our young people don't need to be policed, they need to be reached.
There is a direct correlation between the amount of money that we supply and the amount of assets we give police departments in America and crime. When you take it away, crime goes up. When you offer more, crime goes down, period. More cops in the street keeps the streets safer.
We'll take money from the police and dedicate it instead to social programs. It was basically political. It appealed to certain left-wing anti-cop constituencies.
We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets because we're trying to save lives.
We can check on folks who maybe need some mediation. If there's an argument, we can de-escalate.
Sending in social workers to go handle, a domestic dispute. These are dangerous situations. There's no way that defunding the police department would keep a civilized society in America.
The campaign records show that you spent roughly $70,000 on private security, and some critics say that move is hypocritical. What's your response to those critics?
They would rather I die.
The great irony to everything that the left says about policing is that nobody causes more harm and death to young black people in our inner cities than liberal policies.
7 separate shooting incidents overnight.
Multiple teens who were shot over the holiday weekend.
Shootings in all boroughs except Staten Island.
If you actually want to save black lives in this country, you would have more cops everywhere.
Unfortunately, most black men, by the way of 90%, they die by the hands of other black men. It doesn't feel good to know it. It certainly doesn't feel good to repeat it. But we can't change those things that we simply won't acknowledge.
When you really look at the numbers, most of it is being gang-related, drug-related. It's not police that are going around hunting down black people. It's not the KKK. This type of crime is happening in inner cities like mine all the time.
The culture of the American inner city has soured so much that crime and guns and mayhem have taken over these areas. And these problems are exacerbated by liberal policies that prevent police in so many ways from doing their job.
Police officers can't continue to be judge, jury, and executioner.
Vast majority of cops are great cops. They put the Kevlar vest on every single day so we don't have to. We can't paint the whole police force with a couple of people who did something wrong.
Many of those communities need the police officers to ensure that they are safe, because the people that need the police officers the most were often the victims within their own communities.
I was back on the ground in Portland. These radicalists with Black Lives Matter started hounding this white man for filming them, and then they start physically assaulting him. I was filming undercover, following them the whole time. That's when Adam Hayner showed up and started to say, hey, this is enough. You guys have made your point. Then they turned their attention on him and his wife. Punching his wife through the truck, punching him through the truck, to the point where he had to get out of there. He smashed into the building. They pull him out of the car. They put him to the ground. A straight field goal kick to the back of the head. Knocked him unconscious, and he's bleeding.
Right after the incident on the Brooklyn Bridge, several officers grabbed a hold of me. We had to walk all the way back down to the bottom of the Brooklyn Bridge. The Occupy City Hall protesters proceeded to boo me. When I got into the ambulance, they were trying to block the ambulance until we were able to get out of there and get me to emergency.
Any other time he'd leave, and even if it was just an alarm call, David, he would still wake me up and say, hey, babe, I'm running over to Lee's. For whatever reason, he didn't do it that night. Somebody's knocking on the door, and I'm yelling at Dave to answer the door. He's not answering the door. And I went to the door, and the whole time I'm yelling for Dave. I look out, and it's chief of police, the 2 commanders standing at my door. Still doesn't register. And I asked the chief, I said, "Where's Dave?" He said, "Aunt, Dave's dead." 1 minute to think he's in the basement, and the next minute to find out he's dead. 30 years with somebody, you know them better than anybody else in this world. My world was turned upside down.
Initially, Jake was cleared of any wrongdoing by the DA, and then the protest started in front of the DA's house. 36 days straight. The DA caved.
16 people indicted Gardner on 4 charges: manslaughter, the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, attempted first-degree assault, and terroristic threats.
The minute the charges were read, we turned the TV off and just hugged for a minute and told each other how much we loved each other. I don't think he thought that the way the world was, that he would ever get off of the charges.
September 20th was the day he was supposed to turn himself in. I got a call from his dad that said, "Jake's not here, we can't find him."
We're driving around the parks and all around that area, and I kept yelling out the windows, and we couldn't find him anywhere.
Took me 25 minutes to drive there. Took me about 10 minutes to find his body.
Not even one building past us, and some bushes, and he had shot himself.
Attention retired firefighters.
Used
to answer your questions and tell you what your case is potential.
Create a big.
This is an NBC News special report, remembering George Floyd.
The media decided to take it upon themselves to create a big, giant, grand display of George Floyd's funeral. And they did this 3 separate times. They did it in multiple locations. And while this was going on, the COVID pandemic was at its height. People that were unrelated to George Floyd were unable to have parties or even funerals. Yet George Floyd was able to be put on full display with his death. Rest in peace, George Floyd. I don't think any American or human being should have been treated that way. But the fact that his death is being used as an opportunity to spin political agendas and different narratives, it's a shame.
The riots caused, I believe, $2 billion worth of damage, horrible loss of life, injury, and it completely turned our society upside down.
So the people that were most negatively affected by these riots were the innocent people that lived in these communities, especially the elderly and some of the people that were not on the higher income brackets.
These people are tearing up our livelihood. This is the only place I could go to shop, and now I don't have anywhere to go.
Black Lives Matter did nothing to help get those businesses back. They didn't come back to help clean up the mess or the aftermath. They didn't provide any financial rehabilitation to help those businesses.
It's sad. It's like Black Lives Matter only when a black life is taken by a white cop. Otherwise, there's no interest because perhaps political power can't be achieved, money can't be raised.
Black Lives Matter is stirring the pot again. A California mansion bought with fundraiser dollars.
There's been a lot of allegations of corruption in BLM. Some of the biggest complaints of Black Lives Matter are based on greed and inequities. And you have the people that run Black Lives Matter pulling as much money out for themselves as they can and creating a huge amount of inequality.
So in Minneapolis, the National Guard was mobilized days after the unrest and the death of George Floyd. The presence of the National Guard immediately brought peace. So why not repeat that in Portland, in Seattle, in other cities that are experiencing this massive unrest and mayhem?
Look at what happened in Oregon. They didn't call in the National Guard till after the 2020 election.
As dispersed to the west, we're subject to arrest or citation.
Doesn't that tell you that it was politically motivated, that they wanted to have this disruption, they enabled it?
In Seattle, Chopper Chaz, they turned it into their version of liberal utopia. And what ended up happening, there was drugs in there, people died, there was 2 shootings, 2 murders inside there was rape, there was assault. It was something I've never seen in America before, something that we should never allow to happen again.
So what kind of accountability did we see after these riots?
Scores of demonstrators were arrested and or cited during the summer of protests sparked by the killing of George Floyd. More than 300 cases have been dismissed.
90% of all the cases were dismissed due to a quote-unquote lack of evidence.
In the aftermath of 2020's push to defund the police, homicides skyrocketed.
In 2020, the U.S. saw the biggest spike in murders since the FBI began tracking the data.
More crime, more despair, more poverty. We have an inner city that's even worse.
We are seeing these headlines about percentage increases, but I also want to make sure that this doesn't drive a hysteria.
Now these politicians who are so adamant to defund police, they should be held accountable because the number of people that died and were assaulted, they've created a violent America.
So what was all this about? We all knew Derek Chauvin was going to be convicted.
Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin convicted of murder in the death of George Floyd.
So was this really about the Democrats being able to hold on to the House, take back the Senate, and get Joe Biden and Kamala Harris into the White House? You have to wonder because the Democrats certainly enabled all of this to happen during the 2020 election cycle.
I've received multiple death threats from people in Antifa, Black Lives Matter too, calling me a white supremacist. He's a neo-Nazi, even though I'm Latino, I'm brown. So when I show up somewhere, they're looking for me, I'm the threat. They feel justified by using any means necessary, even physical violence, to stop the white supremacist, to stop the Nazi. Ideas can be dangerous. Lies are dangerous.
I was forced to retire from the New York City Police Department as a result of my injuries. It made me retire from the only job I've ever loved. I'm proud to be a police officer. I never wanted to do anything else. And I will always be proud to say I'm a lieutenant in the New York City Police Department.
It took 8 months to schedule Jake's funeral at Arlington, which is pretty typical. It was the funeral that he had earned. He will be surrounded by a host of other American heroes for eternity. That's exactly where he belongs. I just miss being able to talk to him. We talk for hours every week, and some of those things you kind of take for granted until they're gone.
I miss everything about him. His smile, his kindness. He was a beautiful, beautiful human being.
Dave got a hero's funeral. He got a policeman's funeral. He died the way he lived, as a hero. We were restricted how many people we could have in the church. David had touched so many lives of people that he didn't even know. I want David to be remembered as the happy man he was. He loved his children. Oh my God, he adored his grandchildren. They were his life. David's life is way more important than any of the agendas anyone has.
A lot happened in 2020. We saw COVID quarantine the nation, we saw the George Floyd riots, and all of it seemed to be exploited by Democrats.
These people could not care less about this country. They only care about their own reelection.
What America needs to realize that we're being played from both sides, both from politicians and from the media.
This is a political agenda that has been used to gain more power.
You have to think about the real-world consequences for people living in those neighborhoods.
Leaders should be held to a higher standard. They should bring about policies that actually helps the constituency. The only way to get some semblance of order back is to hold leaders accountable.